Hi, welcome back to the 2014 film blog, which unfortunately has been away for a bit of a while. About that. I was away first of all on a course and been doing various stuff about moving home, so I've not been able to get to cinema really much, let alone do some of these blogs on what I'm watching. And there's an awful lot of stuff that over the last few months I've actually managed to miss. I never got to see the Alan Partridge film. I never got to see Kick-Ass 2, although having read some of the reviews of that one, and given how much I enjoyed the first one, I think perhaps that's possibly a good thing. I will still try and catch up with those if I can at some point on a late screening, but I think we may have missed those two. But anyway, we've got two films to review for you today. So we've got first of all Frances Ha, which is Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig, sort of in full-on Woody Allen mode. And then we've got What Maisie Knew as well to review. So, starting off, Frances Ha, which, as I've said, is the new film from Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig, who last worked together, I think, on Greenberg, which was sort of a Ben Stiller vehicle, but not his usual fare, which was epically alright, I think probably the best way of putting it. Noah Baumbach probably best known for doing Squid and the Whale a few years ago, which again, it's all very much this new wave of kookiness that seems to affect cinema over the last few years, and I'll admit, enforced kookiness to me is not really my cup of tea. But we sort of went along and we caught this one, given that by all accounts it's not a bad film, and there are apparently big overtones of Woody Allen. I'm an absolutely huge fan of Woody Allen, so that was decent promise. So, basically, Frances Ha stars Greta Gerwig as the eponymous Frances, who is living in basically a garret in Brooklyn with her old college roommate Sophie. And she's one night is out talking to her boyfriend, who suggests that because her lease is coming up, perhaps the two of them ought to move in together. To which Frances basically says, "Oh no, I can't do that. I promised Sophie that I'd stay with her." To which the boyfriend obviously realises then that clearly Frances is not all that into him, and they basically break up, and Frances goes back to her flat and talks to Sophie. And you sort of start to see this developing relationship between the two of them and how they live together. I think the best way of describing the attitude of the pair of them, I think the phrase is called poverty porn. It's basically this theory that young bohemians want to sort of play at being poor. So it's sort of all about sitting around 2-bar radiators or on sort of grilled vents outside their windows, smoking and drinking cheap white wine and reading Henry James novels. And this is the whole thing. It's about what the perception of being poor is without actually being poor. Now, whether or not that's genuinely the way Noah Baumbach feels, I would sincerely hope not, but it's certainly the attitude that's imbued in these two characters, is that they quite clearly are not poor. For a start, they're living in Brooklyn. The average Brooklyn rent is about $3,000 a month, so you can't be that poor if you're paying that kind of price. Also, I think Sophie is an aspiring journalist, and Frances is an aspiring dancer. And one of the real influences, certainly that I got from this, particularly in the character of Frances, it reminds me an awful lot of that Miranda July film, The Future, which again focused on one of these bohemian, kooky types who believes that the path to their future and redemption lies within making a career out of modern dance. It does seem to be, to me, a bit of a lazy stereotype, I'll be honest with you, in those terms. But if it's acted well, I don't see any real problem with it and why it's being done. So you've now got Sophie and Frances in their flat together, playing being poor, and Sophie then announces that actually she's moving out to live with somebody else. Now you can see the betrayal on the face of Frances, who's basically just turned down the opportunity to move in with her boyfriend on the pretext that she believed that she and Sophie were destined to stay together forever. And this is where it starts to get a bit good, in that you can almost see the immaturity and childishness of Frances, who doesn't seem to understand what it means to grow up and wants to stay forever in that college roommate mindset. And I don't think she doesn't really realise that Sophie is growing up and she's not. I mean, it's what they call the twenteens. So effectively, a few generations ago, those in their early to mid-20s would have been getting married, settling down, buying a house, having their first child. In the modern world, that simply doesn't happen. And you've suddenly got this wilderness in your early 20s that are your twenteens, in which no one's really certain where they want to be, either career-wise, relationship-wise, child-wise, and everything just sort of drifts for a good 5-10 years until you sort of hit your 30s and you find yourself where you have ended up. And that's essentially what this film is about. It's a paean to your twenteens and what it means to be a modern 20-something, in which you're not really sure where you want to be, and you're still massively trying to discover yourself. So obviously Frances has to move out because she can't afford rent by herself, and she moves in with, again, two other Bohemian chaps, who are, again, not in the slightest bit poor. They can afford a very, very nice flat, and she lives with them for a while. She then has a huge row with Sophie and decides to go off to see her parents, and the rest of the film is mostly spent with Frances trying to discover who she is. And this is the whole point of the film. It's, what does it mean to be young and independent and trying to find where you belong? And certainly for somebody of my own age, it's a nice sort of thought. It does seem very, very stylised. Certainly my early 20s were nothing like this. It was mostly spent every night down the pub, to be honest with you. But different things. I mean, it's clearly stylised, and certainly there's huge overtones here of Woody Allen. Not just being set in Manhattan, but also Brooklyn. It's the way that it all fits together. Problem is, Noah Baumbach clearly desperately wants to be Woody Allen, and he's just not Woody Allen. That's the problem. A lot of the things that happen in this film, even on Woody Allen's most off days, he wouldn't have gone with that. That's not to say it's a bad film. You know, the fact that if the criteria of being a good film was that it was basically like Woody Allen, you wouldn't see many good films out there. It certainly isn't a criticism as much to say that it's not Woody Allen is a bad thing. It's the fact that it so desperately wants to be a Woody Allen film, and that's the one thing it's not. And I think he still has a way to go if he wants to really inherit that role when Woody eventually does hang up his camera and leave. But it's certainly got a lot of very interesting things to say about what it means to be a modern 20-year-old, as it were. There's a few great scenes where Frances goes off to Paris, because obviously, being a Bohemian liberal, she obviously believes that her future and her destiny lies within Paris, and she finds it clearly a very depressing place by herself, and it suddenly seems to hit her that perhaps her future isn't going to go the way it was supposed to. And again, you sort of see, as she develops as a character, she seems to grow up more and more and more. So by the end of the film, she's finally approaching what might be considered an actual adult in the main sense of the word. So, by no means a bad film. Certainly, I can think of much worse ways to have spent a few hours of my life than watching this film. At its best, it does begin to resemble sort of lower end Woody Allen stuff. It obviously owes a huge debt to Annie Hall and that kind of thing. And there's also a smattering of breakpoint and that kind of thing about how you have to try and grow up, and about how when you obtain a profession and a career, you have to leave behind those who you previously knew. And the fact that getting a partner means that you have to, in effect, make a choice. I mean, there's an old adage that if you get a partner, it costs you two friends. And that's something that Frances doesn't seem to understand, is that even when she has a partner, she puts him below Sophie. Whereas when Sophie gets a partner, she loses Frances. And it's about the relationship between the two young women and what it means to actually grow up. It's certainly a film that is worth seeing. In no terms is it a bad film. It's not a Woody Allen film, and that's the one thing I think it wanted to be, which it fails on, is this desperation to be Woody Allen. But ultimately, it certainly isn't a bad way to spend a few hours of your time. If you're a bit bored, go in and watch it, go in and enjoy it. I don't think it's going to trouble my top 10 films of the year, but ultimately, it's been a good year this year for films, so perhaps that isn't a surprise. But, just give it a go. Speak to you soon.